When a human skull was found on this beach, there was little doubt the victim had been murdered. But it was what happened 6 months before that discovery that would be vital in solving this case. The killer had boasted that even if police found his victim, they would never prove he was the murderer. But these were no bare bones.
Botany Bay was a crime scene today after a human skull was found buried in a sandbank. A man walking his dog made the grim discovery.
He was quite taken aback, rather shocked, and he went home to settle down with a cup of tea, I think. It was rather unexpected on a Sunday morning.
While the victim's identity remains a mystery, police here have called in Task Force Snowy, the special team of detectives investigating a series of gangland murders dating back to the 80s.
What we had here was a crime scene, and we all know from experience that crime scenes leave clues. The trick is to find the clues. So we had to, one, get the remains out, and secondly, preserve any forensic capacity that was there. With an encroaching tide later that day, we knew we were on time limits.
The tide had already uncovered the top of his skull, so it may undermine the area where we had to dig. And I spoke to Lyle at the scene and said, I think we need to put some form of protection in so that we weren't going to lose what could have been vital information and vital evidence.
With the tide coming so close to the skull could well have been washed away. So we built a sandbag area around the skeleton and backfilled the entire area with sifted sand to stabilise the skull. Because we only get one go at forensics, we can't go back and put bodies back and re-dig them. It is absolutely imperative that everything is addressed first time round.
Task Force Snowy had recently received a tip-off that a particular murder victim from the 1980s had been buried in this very spot.
There may have been fired cartridge cases in there, projectiles, any of the ID from the deceased, like a wallet or anything else that may have been discarded by the murderers, the firearm itself. So we had to make sure that we didn't miss any of that evidence.
The skeleton is approximately 5 feet below the surface of the soil of the embankment. Currently, members of the rescue squad and a backhoe operator are removing the vegetation on top of where the skeleton is located. The backhoe operator removed all the sand from the top of the body, and when we got to a level where we believed that we should start digging by hand, there was still a large amount of sand there, so we got him to use the backhoe scoop, and he started scooping away, and unfortunately the first scoop of sand, out came this brown tan shoe, hooked on the fork of the backhoe. I was not happy about that.
Yeah, when they hooked onto his shoe, I thought, oh no, they might have ripped him about a bit.
Obviously we stopped digging at that stage, and from there on in we went down very slowly by hand.
It's now 5:20 p.m. We've removed the overburden to the level of the sandbags that we established earlier on today. These 3 blue arrows here indicate the location of the skeletal head, approximately here. We'll continue digging down until we uncover the remains. The closer we got to the body, the smaller the implements we started using. We eventually ended up using paintbrushes and spoons to actually dig the sand away from the remains so as not to damage them. The time's now 8:25 p.m, Sunday the 26th of March 1995. The skeletal remains have now been fully uncovered. The left foot was recovered earlier today, and as you can see it's missing from the body at this point in time. And there appears to be some broken bones in the vicinity of the right wrist. A leather belt around the waist of the deceased. There appears to be some corroded metal, which possibly could have been a buckle. It looked like something from a movie, but here we were dealing with it in real life. 895 with his head in the position he is.
We were able to dig down underneath the body There was a bit of a seal between the remains and the sand, and we broke that seal by 2 police officers tying a piece of string to their hands and just moving it down underneath the body. So once that had occurred, we then positioned a bodyboard under those remains.
It's coming through. You passed the pelvis now.
I was very worried when we started sliding that spinal board under there because things started moving, sand started crumbling, and I thought, this is not going to work. But the more we persevered, the better it came together, and it did actually work.
We were then able to lift it up and place it into a body bag and head it down to the mortuary. At that stage, all we had are skeletal remains, partially dressed in some clothing, full stop.
But these bones would tell a story. Within the skeleton were clues to its identity, and that of the killer. When a skull was found buried deep within a sand dune, a special task force of detectives were called into the site by the local police.
There are a number of police there, including one of the botany detectives. He said, "Oh, we found one of your bodies." I said, "Oh, that's great, mate. Which one?"
This area was considered a dumping ground for gangland murders of the 80s, and this may be one of its victims.
He took me over and showed me the skull. And this skull, dead set, had a really long, thin face. And I thought this could be Harvey. And I don't want this to sound derogatory, but having known Harvey, he had a very thin, long face.
Harvey Jones was a minor criminal. He was a glorified thief. He was a would-be gangster.
He was well dressed, well turned out, dripping in gold. He was a mug there, and mate, he was as fresh as a rat with the gold teeth. He went missing. His mother was very upset. His sisters were very upset. There was a very basic investigation done by police at the time. Because of the people he mixed with, we wasn't sure whether he'd gone overseas, gone underground, moved interstate, or just didn't want to be found.
Got him? Going to hand or you right?
We needed a positive identification of the human remain. So it was okay for us to suppose that it was Harvey Jones, but we had to prove it to a coroner, and we also had to prove it was murdered.
Given the nature of the case where police suspected foul play, it was very important to examine the body in its entirety and to be as comprehensive as possible. So literally, you want to have as much material as you can.
The first thing that was done was to take an X-ray of the remains, obviously to find anything which might be inside which would be of interest.
The X-rays showed tiny fragments of foreign material that was consistent with the outside casing of a fired projectile. And the 2 projectiles that we recovered were quite deteriorated, but nevertheless they were consistent with having been fired into that body.
The suspicion that the victim had been shot was right on the money, but whether it was Harvey Jones or another gunshot victim was still up in the air. There was no fingerprints or DNA available, but what had weathered the years was the dead man's clothing, still hanging on his skeleton.
It was amazing to see how much of the clothing was still intact. The cardigan was still there. You could clearly see the side seams of where the jeans had been. The buttons still had all their markings on them. The cardigan was one of those ones that had the leather patches on it, and you could see where the leather patches had been. The nylon fabrics, the interfacing and lining of the cardigan was 100% intact. You could almost move the zipper on it.
One of the things that had been reported when Harvey went missing in 1983, that he was wearing a particular brand shirt, Fuss, F-U-S. And that shirt had been obtained from overseas in a place called Qatar and had been sent to him by his sister. But that by itself was not conclusive. Clothing per se is unreliable. People can change clothing and there's always more than one shirt in existence, so it's not conclusive. We needed to go much further than that.
Well, we thought we'd identify him by dental records to start with, so we went along to the dentist and said, you know, have you got the records of Harvey? And they said, oh, no, he was seen here 7 years and 1 week away when we've destroyed the records, because you've only got to keep them by statute for 7 years. So I said to the detectives we could carry out this video superimposition. So we've just got that centred now, that ball joint centred around where his front teeth are, because they showed me a photograph and it had teeth in it, smiling teeth. So we've got something to actually match up, because we had the teeth on the skull and the teeth on the photograph. Head down a bit more, head down, head down, head down. Yeah, that's getting close, coming in. That'll be very close now. So you can use 2 television cameras to overlay the teeth from the photograph to the teeth on the skull. Now we're overlaying the premolars to start with, then across to this canine with this very unusual worn-off canine, with the next tooth with the lateral tooth, which is usually a lot smaller, and then coming across to these front teeth with a V chip in them, and then across to the lateral on the other side. Then you can look for the rest of the skull for outline of soft tissue to see if it matches. Looking at from the right side to the left side, the outline of the orbit, the eye position. Then coming across to the left-hand side, you're looking at the bony outline. You can see on the soft tissue relative to the bone where that large lump of bone is above the eye.
And as they crossed, it just jumped out of you. It was Harvey. It was quite disconcerting, slightly creepy, a bit like a horror movie where the face melts away and you've got the skull left. It was like Harvey's face had jumped out of the skull at you.
At that point, we had the first positive identification that would stand scrutiny in any form, in any court, that the person that we dug up was Harvey Jones.
But who had killed the 29-year-old man 12 years before? The task force was in possession of other vital evidence, evidence that would put them hot on the heels of the killer. 29-year-old Harvey Jones had vanished in 1983. His clothed skeleton was found 12 years later. Its identity only confirmed through one photo that had survived over the years.
It was quite a wonderful photograph. It was of some individuals having lunch, and there was the lobster in front of them, the glass of Chardonnay, a fairly bulky bloke on one side, Harvey Jones on the other side.
That bulky bloke, linking arms with Harvey, was his best mate, Neddy Smith, who was one of the most well-known and feared criminals in the 1980s.
Neddy was a career criminal, a long history of convictions for thieving, assaults, robberies, armed robberies. A large man, physically overpowering. The only way you'd hold him down would be with a piece of 4x2 around the ears. He was a very violent character, very mean, just a vile creature.
But he had some powerful friends.
According to him, he was involved in large-scale police corruption. He was given a green light to commit armed robberies, to be involved in drugs.
The bloke was effectively bulletproof. He could do what he wanted in this town. Anything. Smith has repeatedly and very publicly said he was provided with police assistance to the point of being dropped off and picked up from armed robberies in marked cars and being provided with police equipment and uniforms to conduct armed robberies. So, a fairly significant relationship.
And one that Harvey Jones admired.
Harvey Jones idolised Neddy Smith and just wanted to be as infamous as what he was.
Harvey Jones is a very small-time player on this scene. He earned his living managing a brothel at Homebush. He was a used car salesman at another point. A loudmouth, tall, gangly fellow who nonetheless seemed to throw his weight around in pubs, had propensities to wearing loud, fake jewellery. Thought he was hanging around with the man of the moment and would be seen to be a serious gangster if he's able to go out drinking with Neddy Smith and Ned would give him the time of day. But he doesn't seem to have really added much to Smith's business or to caused him anything other than trouble.
Harvey had been charged with some thefts of some gold bullion. There was a court case pending.
And he had been assembling the money, he said, to bribe police to have those charges fixed.
And according to Neddy Smith in one of his autobiographies, finding the money wasn't going to be difficult for Harvey, and Neddy would help him with the exchange. But only 24 hours before the deal was to be done, Harvey was making himself unpopular.
He was involved in an incident at Sheila's nightclub at North Sydney. He had a habit of going to nightclubs, pulling out his revolver, letting one go on the roof to the horror of the patrons. That caused police inquiries, and it brought some unwanted attention to him and also to the people he was actually hanging around with.
The next night, July 15th, 1983, Harvey Jones was to make the $60,000 payment in return for his charges being dropped.
He told his mother that he was going to see Neddy Smith that night for a meeting, according to her, and that was the last time that she had seen him.
But in his book, Neddy claims Harvey never turned up. And after waiting for hours, he called Mrs. Jones, wondering where her son was.
Smith was recorded a few days later saying that he'd contacted Harvey's mother and was concerned about his welfare.
Nobody had seen him or heard of him or heard what happened to him. It was just one of those sort of dead investigations.
But other than people who knew him directly and noticed his absence, Harvey Jones disappearing off the face of the planet wasn't going to cause a great deal of public concern.
But over the next few years, disappearances and underworld murders would literally be in the public arena.
Sydney police are hunting the underworld assassins of 49-year-old Barry Croft.
The shooting happened just before 7 o'clock in the midst of late-night shoppers.
There's many areas he could have been taken, but the underworld like to do it in the open streets.
Barry McCann's bullet-riddled body was discovered at 6:30 this morning by a council cleaner. This was a professional hit. Police have found more than 20 spent cartridges.
The body of Sally Ann Huxtep was fished out of a pond at Centennial Park today.
Michael Daniel Chubb had just returned from buying fish and chips for lunch when the killer struck.
By the time that the shooting had stopped, there were perhaps a dozen fairly well-known crooks dead during this period. No one was charged for any of their murders. Neddy Smith, his name had been connected to some of these, but certainly other people's names had been connected to them as well. They were on the books as unsolved murders.
In 1994, Task Force Snowy was on the scene. In their hands, they had secretly taped confessions about these murders. One of them was about Harvey Jones, and the voice on the tape was of the man he idolised, Neddy Smith.
The underworld figure, Arthur Neddy Smith, has been sentenced to life for the murder of a stranger. A Supreme Court judge rejected Smith's claim that he'd been too drunk to know what he was doing.
For a fellow who was perhaps this city's most notorious criminal ever, he has come unstuck through road rage.
Neddy Smith was found to have stabbed Ronald Flavelle in the stomach on Coogee Bay Road. The dispute broke out when a tow truck driver flicked his lights at a car Smith was travelling in. Today, Justice McInerney sentenced Smith to life in jail, adding to the 13-year sentence he's already serving for armed robbery.
The crunch finally came and he went to jail for life. But he was still eligible to apply for parole. That wouldn't have meant that he was going to get it, but he's still able to apply, and of course anything could happen.
Neddy spent nearly 3 years alone in his cell here at Long Bay Prison, and during that time he wrote a book, Neddy, The Life and Crimes of Neddy Smith, which became a bestseller. But as he started to pen his next, a book about the unsolved murders of the 80s, he had company.
There was a little bit of overcrowding, and by chance, another prisoner was placed in the same cell.
They asked if I'd like to go in with someone I might have heard of through the media or who I might know through the prison system. And I asked them who it was, but they wouldn't tell me. So they led me up to the cell blocks and locked me in the cell up there, and then Neddy Smith walked in. He was pretty impressive, pretty large sort of a bloke, physically. He knows how to take up a room. But he had these eyes that just bored straight through you, like real cold, icy blue. Yeah, he's a one-off, that's for sure.
Police would know this prisoner as Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown has spent most of his adult life in prison for thieving, assaults, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. Just one of those institutionalised persons who survives in the jail environment.
Well, there was only 2 of us in the unit, so you had to talk to someone, so we ended up talking to each other and struck up a pretty good rapport with each other, and he was writing a book at the time, and he began telling me about some of the things he did that he could put into the book and some of the things he did that he couldn't put into the book. And some of those was about various murders, so yeah. They're pretty brutal, pretty frank. Like, I've been in jail at that stage probably 20 years, and they scared me because I knew that they were true. That was probably more like, you hear a lot of stories in jail and you just put it down to bullshit, but with this bloke, he just knew.
Neddy started bragging to him about murders that he'd committed, and the informant was quite sickened by the way that Neddy, with cold-bloodedly, told him about these murders.
He told me about a certain murder that he did, and it gave me nightmares, and that's when I thought, well, you know, maybe this is a bit more than just being a crime in a jail. Maybe I should do something about it. So I contacted the police and the operation began.
With the cooperation of Mr. Brown, we were able to capture a lot of these conversations about all these unsolved murders going back many years on an authorised listening device tape.
I lay awake many nights thinking about it and thinking about the consequences and whether I'd be able to do it or not. And I couldn't find a reason not to.
I think in total there was mention of 14 separate murders. Some of them were gangland related, some of them were drug rip-offs, and some of them were revenge killings.
One of them was the murder of Harvey Jones.
Yeah, I know a little bit. Yeah. I sort of still think I don't even know how
Mr. Brown ran a very high risk. One word out of place, Neddy was not stupid completely. If he just said the wrong thing, well, he would have been in fairly grim straits.
I was thinking, shit, I hope he doesn't hear the tape recorder. That's about all I was thinking. Yeah.
But he persevered, and he teased a lot of detail, a lot of information from Neddy.
He's so dodgy, I said, you'll get the fuck up, mate. It's Louis Arnold, I think 3x7. What did you kill him for? What do you have to go for? What do I know all these things for? You're going to write a book, you can't. No, I'm just interested, that's all.
In a lot of ways, it seemed to me that the only reason that he killed Harvey was because Harvey annoyed him. I'd never met Harvey, but from what I did find out about him, it seemed that he was a bit of a party boy. He went over the top a few times, but he certainly didn't deserve to pay for it with his life for no more than upsetting the bloke. But that's how things were back then.
To use his words, he elsewhere in the book indicates that most big-time criminals come undone because of their mouth, and they tell too many people too many things. And here is he falling for the same trap. The tapes themselves would have allowed us to go out and charge Neddy forthwith, but that would have been quite foolish to do it, because any brief that hinges on a confession per se, well, wouldn't get past first base, and you'd just be wasting your time. It'd be nothing worse than charging Neddy than watching him walk.
What they needed was a body, and for months they searched the area mentioned by Neddy on the tapes.
I've flown over, I've driven over, I've walked through. I knew it better than I really wanted to, but I didn't find Harvey Jones. A man walking his dog found Harvey Jones.
I was watching the news and it said how a bloke had been walking his dog along the beach at Botany and found human remains. And it was pretty much where Neddy had said it was on the tape. And I said, I bet that's Harvey Jones.
My first impressions was, well, here's one brief for Ned.
And Neddy had given them a challenge.
So the trouble is, if they find the skeleton, they can check who they are.
Somewhere in those remains hopefully would give us that linkage back to Neddy Smith and confirm what was on the tapes.
He thought he'd got away with it, cold. He thought he'd be right, for sure.
Here we had a person who was sticking his thumbs up at society in general and saying, I've got away with this. And that was our challenge, to make sure, well, you just can't do these things and get away with it. And that was our challenge then, to make sure that we put him away and he paid the price for what he's done.
Police had secretly taped Neddy Smith in his jail cell, confessing to the murder of his friend Harvey Jones. And was confident he'd got away with it.
So the trouble is, if they find the skeleton, they can check who they are.
We had no doubts that Harvey Jones had been murdered by Neddy, but the standard of proof in the courts for a charge of murder is extremely high, and it's beyond reasonable doubt, not just that you think it was him. Neddy, unfortunately, had been locked up for some time and didn't appreciate the value of forensics. He had been locked away, he felt that sense of security. A lot of time had elapsed. He would think that there'd be nothing to tie him back into the crime scene or the crime.
The first step in the process was to establish whether the projectiles found at the post-mortem were fired from a .357 revolver, as Neddy had stated.
There was not a lot of evidence presented to us ballistics-wise. Usually when we go to crime scenes, we'll have a body, we'll have fired cartridge cases, we'll have the smoking gun, so to speak. In this case, we had none of that, except the recovery of the 2 bullets, which were heavily corroded and badly damaged as well. If we recover a bullet under normal circumstances and it's in quite good condition, we will weigh the projectile, we'll measure the projectile, the diameter of it with calipers. We'll also look at those individual markings on the bullet, those lands and grooves, and we can do that by looking at it under a microscope, which will give us an indication of what type of firearm could possibly have been used. What we're looking at here is the surface of the bullet, the side view, and we're actually looking at one of the landmarks on the bullet to make an identification. The problem in this case was that we could only identify one partial landmark on each of the bullets. However, even though the examination was limited, we went to our reference material. Did some firing of some weapons out of our library and found the 2 bullets, both consistent with being fired from a .38 caliber .357 revolver.
It was encouraging evidence, but the task force would need further proof. Neddy had claimed he had used the .357 and blew out Harvey's heart.
The X-rays were very helpful and showed a number of fractures in ribs of the chest cavity, undoubtedly fractured by a gunshot. There were shards of projectile around the fracture line, indicating that a projectile had entered the chest, probably from the front, in all likelihood striking the heart and/or lungs.
But even that wasn't enough for this team of detectives led by John Laycock. For them, it was a matter of crossing all T's and dotting all I's.
I don't like just to put the bales on top of the stumps. I like to belt the stumps right in, so there's no room for any movement. We're playing A grade here. This is a first-class crook, if I can use those terms, and it was going to be a fight to the end. So we didn't want to leave anything open to any suggestion that it wasn't so.
It could be easily seen as a get square. They had to overcome that, and therefore everything they did had to be very much above board.
We were on the right track. We just had to keep on going to really tighten the noose around his neck and give him no room to move. If you raced out, you'd muck it up, and you'd never forgive yourself if you walked.
To further support our theory, we sent one of Harvey's ribs down to an expert in Melbourne. What we needed to know was there any traces of lead on these ribs?
I was basically asked by New South Wales Police to have a look at some bones. There was some visible damage to one of the rib bones, and they wanted to know if this damage was caused due to a gunshot or some other form of damage that could have occurred while the body was buried in the sand. The damage was cone-shaped, which is very typical of bullet damage. But then there was obviously a matter of actually proving it, not just giving an opinion.
To do that, the bone was put into a scanning electron microscope so that any particles on the rib could be detected and analysed. Various heavy metals show up as various images.
Material that has a high atomic number basically shows up as a bright particle. So things like iron and lead, you get quite bright images.
And lead has its own unique shape and form.
A pattern is produced, and that pattern corresponds to lead. In this case, both lead and calcium was detected. The calcium comes from the bones. So the material that was actually on the bones was in fact lead. The finding of lead on the bone and around the damage confirms that a lead projectile, a bullet, caused that damage.
Even more damning evidence was found from the clothes Harvey was wearing on the night he was murdered.
When I started examining the cardigan and the shirt, I had to distinguish between decay and forensic evidence. I located what I believe to be a projectile hole on the cardigan, midway up on the nylon section of the zipper. Now, the remainder of the zipper was totally intact bar this one area.
Harvey's shirt also had a distinctive hole.
We were able to determine that the fabric had been doubled over when the projectile had been fired. When you overlay the two pieces of fabric, it becomes a perfectly circular hole. The holes were measured for diameter. Both the holes in the right chest area were consistent with being either a .38 calibre projectile or a .357 calibre projectile. The most crucial piece of forensic evidence that was obtained from the clothing was the fact that the holes in the jumper in the front right chest area matched the holes in the shirt in the right chest area, and we were clearly able to establish a bullet trajectory from entering the cardigan, through the shirt, and actually striking a rib in Harvey's chest.
We're on a winner. We're on a conviction. We knew it.
The forensic case linking Neddy Smith to the murder of Harvey Jones was strong. Not only had the experts proven the skeleton in the sandhills was Harvey, but they were able to prove that he had been shot, and the weapon was most likely a .357 revolver. When those bullets exited the gun, they made a perfect and traceable trajectory through his cardigan and shirt, hitting a rib in his chest. Police now had the forensic evidence they needed to match the words used by Neddy in their secretly taped recordings. Also in the confession was the mention of a man who was with Neddy on the night Harvey was killed, a man who police would call Mr. Green.
He'd originally been spoken to by police and was uncooperative. However, when the body was found, it firmed up certain information that we'd been given, and he became cooperative with the police.
Mr. Green was a driver or a gopher for Neddy Smith in those years, and he told us the whole story. On the night of the 15th of July 1983, according to Mr. Green, he went to the Star Hotel in Alexandria where he met Neddy and Harvey Jones. There was some discussion about Mr. Green making some money that night. So they all got into a van and Neddy directed them to drive to the vicinity of Botany. They alighted from the car and Neddy Smith and Harvey Jones went for a walk down to the beach. Mr. Green stayed behind on Neddy's instructions to keep a lookout. A short time later, there was a gunshot and Harvey had been shot by Neddy. He walked down to the beach and he saw Harvey lying on the ground. Neddy was standing over the top of him with a gun in his hand. Mr. Green was then directed by Neddy to dig a hole, which he did. There was a shovel obtained from the van. He dug a fairly deep hole and the body was placed into that hole, and they then left the scene and went back that night to the Star Hotel and just continued on business. Now, that by itself is pretty damning evidence, but it's a man's word and it's open to dispute. You'd probably have to look at possible motives and his background. So it's a question of how much weight you would place on it per se. But put together as a package with the tapes, the crime scene, the forensics, it certainly left no gap that Neddy could punch holes in when it got to court. So it just helped tie everything together.
Colourful Sydney identity Neddy Smith has appeared in court, charged with murdering an underworld figure 15 years ago.
Arthur Neddy Smith under tight security to face trial for the gangland killing of brothel owner Harvey Jones. It's 15 years to the day since he was executed with 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. He was then buried in sand dunes along Botany Bay. Police claim Smith lured Jones to the beach to get $60,000, allegedly to pay off corrupt detective Roger Rogerson for getting Jones off a criminal charge. His body was undiscovered for 13 years. Prosecutors say Smith confessed to the crime. He was secretly recorded boasting about how he got away with it.
The Defence Counsel consented to those tapes being admitted into evidence without contest. So the only defence that Neddy would have was say I was boasting or telling lies or what have you.
His explanation, in his words, were, "I'm talking crap."
It's pretty accurate crap for someone that's talking crap.
He was saying that he was testing Mr. Brown, seeing if he told him this story, he heard it back on the prison grapevine. And he says that did in fact happen.
There's been a day of courtroom drama as alleged hitman Neddy Smith came face to face with a cellmate who informed on him.
Looking back now, I think it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, but at the time it seemed very, very simple, very easy. I got nervous, you know, before court, just like anyone else, I suppose, and like talking in public and that. But and probably because I was telling the truth in the court, see, so it didn't really matter that much. I just had to go and tell the truth, so I didn't have to worry about keeping stories together or anything like that.
The trial, that included evidence from Mr. Brown and all the forensic experts, lasted 2 months.
Even with all the evidence and with our confidence, you can never estimate what a jury would or would not do. The jury was out for about 3 or 4 days, which was a very torturous process.
Was there something we'd missed? Was there going to be a legal technicality to be thrown up by the jury and either a hung jury, which would have involved a retrial, or, God forbid, to be acquitted?
Sydney's most notorious gangster will spend the rest of his life in prison. Arthur Neddy Smith was found guilty of murder.
He was first jailed for theft at the age of 15. Now he's convicted of killing brothel owner Harvey Jones. Just as Carolyn Simpson said, Smith showed no remorse or contrition. She said the murder was premeditated, cold-blooded and deliberate. Jones had become a nuisance to him.
It also proves that our legal system does work, even on a 15-year-old murder. And more importantly, I suppose, for Harvey Jones, even though he was a scandal, his 80-year-old mum will now have some peace in the final years.
Already serving a life sentence for killing a tow truck driver, Smith was eligible for parole within weeks. The Jones verdict finishes that.
Neddy was charged with a total of 7 murders arising from those prison tapes. 4 were dismissed at committal. He was acquitted by a jury for another, and when police won this case, they decided not to proceed with the 7th.
There's 1 conviction And then we called it quits after that because it was the end result was life meaning life. He would never walk out of jail vertically.
The way and the manner in which the body was found, the place it was found, the bullet wounds that were found on the body, everything supported what Neddy had confessed, and we could prove everything that he had said.
And to have a jury satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that Neddy had murdered Harvey was just one of the best feelings you get as an investigator. It's not up to police to convict a person. We just put the evidence before the jury, and in this case we'd satisfied the jury that Neddy had killed Harvey.
There were high fives all round and congratulations, and went and had a couple of beers afterwards. It's a good feeling.
We'd taken on one of the best in his day from the other side and we'd won.
For John Laycock, his fight and search continues.
I'd suggest there's at least one set of remains at Port Botany from the 80s with the gang wars, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were several more. We haven't given up yet.
The triple murder of Jennifer, Sarah and Adrian De Gruchy would baffle police with its apparent lack of motive. But finding the killer was possible. The father of forensics, Edmund Lockhart, wrote in 1910 that every contact leaves a trace. And in solving this crime, those words were never so true.
Matthew come from over the road and he looked in a distressed state, you know, sort of in a bad way, and as he got close he said there's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
Something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
Sarah being an epileptic, I thought Jenny was having a bit of problem giving her the medicine. She just wanted someone to help her. I went to the front door, I seen Jenny's door just slightly ajar, so I thought I'd go up there and see if she's in her bedroom. I walked to the door, called out to Jenny. Had no reply, so I pushed the door open. The bedroom was dark. I seen a lump on the bed and I don't know, I just thought she was just going to jump up and go boom or something like that. So I walked over beside the bed, grabbed hold of the blanket and pulled it back, and that's when I found Jenny. I just couldn't wait to get out of there. That's when I called out to my father-in-law and told him to ring the police and ambulance.
We were met by a young male that had walked out of the house. He was crying. He was saying things like, "What's happened? Who's done this?"
18-year-old Matthew De Gruchy was totally distraught and was immediately taken to hospital. Inside the house, members of his family were dead.
When I first got there, it was around 9 o'clock or thereabouts, and went into the house. I had a look at the first bedroom, which is the master bedroom, and I saw a deceased adult female. I then moved down a hallway towards the second bedroom, where I saw a deceased teenage female. We then searched the remainder of the house, and we entered through a door into the garage, and that's where we found the deceased form of Adrian. The injuries were horrific. They were quite distressing, actually, to view. Not something that you'd want anyone really to have to see.
When I arrived at the crime scene, the police showed me the bodies of 3 deceased people. I think with Jennifer De Gruchy, she was lying in bed with the blankets and sheets partially up over her. There was a set of glasses on a bedside table nearby that to me looked as if she'd hopped into bed and had her reading glasses on and maybe had turned the light off, put her glasses beside her and had gone off to sleep, and perhaps after that time was attacked.
There was not a large amount of blood spatter in the room,
which was basically inconsistent with the degree of the trauma which had been inflicted on the victim. It was quite likely that something had been placed over her head at the time that she was attacked. However, we did see some very small blood staining on the wall and on the bedhead behind the deceased, which did appear to us to be unusual in its shape and its location.
I examined Sarah and found that she was lying on her bed with a set of Walkmans nearby and was listening to maybe some music or something like that. So it made me feel, if Sarah didn't hear anything, and presumably she didn't, maybe she was then attacked.
Again, with Sarah's room, there were similar circumstances in relation to the amount of blood staining which was evident. There was, in our opinion, relatively small amounts of blood staining, and again it appeared likely that something had been placed over her head at the time of the attack.
Adjacent to Sarah's body was a blood-stained pillow, which seemed to have come from another part of the house. It didn't look like one of the pillows that she'd slept on. I wondered whether that pillow had been used to maybe partially smother her, or it might have been a combination of the person or persons involved tried to smother her and at the same time were bludgeoning her about the head.
Having examined the injuries to Jennifer and Sarah, Dr. Carla found evidence that 15-year-old Adrian was also a victim of a surprise attack.
It looked to me like Adrian was working in the garage and might have been doing some repair work on a chair. There was some woodwork glue around and the chair was upturned. I thought, though, that not only that, but looking at Adrian's injuries, particularly at the back of his head, seemed to suggest to me that perhaps the attacker came in and launched a blitz-type attack or a very rapid attack on Adrian's head at the back. There was also blood on the ceiling of the garage, and it had to me the characteristics of what's called cast-off blood. In other words, it's blood that's on a already bloodied weapon that's been used in an attack on somebody. And when that weapon is brought back or raised upwards in a rapid way, any blood that's on that weapon is literally cast off that weapon and strikes things like the ceiling or the wall or any other objects that happen to be nearby.
It gives us an indication of where the assailant had actually been standing and also in what position the victim had been at the time of being struck.
Who had so violently attacked and murdered this family? And what was the murder weapon that had been used? The victims themselves would hold the answers.
Police are mystified by the horrific murder of a mother and her 2 teenage children battered to death in their Wollongong home. Their bodies were discovered this morning by another son who was away for the night. The woman's husband, who works in Sydney, is returning to the house tonight.
The woman's 19-year-old son collapsed in shock after discovering Jenny De Gruchy's battered body in the main bedroom of the house when he arrived home around 9 this morning. In a second bedroom, he found his 13-year-old sister Sarah also dead. Her 15-year-old brother Adrian was later discovered in the garage. Forensic experts searched the house for clues this morning.
There were a couple of unusual aspects of the scene. In Jennifer's bedroom, which was the main bedroom of the premises, there was a relatively large area of carpet which had been cut from the floor, which in itself was unusual because the house was only relatively new. There were also a couple of smaller pieces which had been cut, one from near the base of the bed and another near the doorway. These, of course, pose questions to the investigator of why has the carpet been cut.
Whoever had taken that piece of carpet wanted it removed because it may have indicated to us, after testing, something that would identify him. Maybe the assailant had spilt some blood, and for that reason that person had to remove that carpet.
And in the hallway, there was further evidence of the killer possibly covering his tracks.
The hallway was subjected to a very detailed examination. We used an instrument known as a polylight, which is an artificial light source we often use. It aids us in detecting small amounts of trace evidence. It had been noted that there was a reddish-coloured stain in a couple of locations in the hallway, but they looked as though they might have been slightly diluted. It may well have been that this blood was in fact that of the offender, and he may well have made an attempt to clean up that blood from the floor, knowing full well that it was his own blood. We conducted presumptive testing for the presence of blood on the stains that we observed in the hallway, and they proved positive. So from that, a number of swabs were taken and sent away for further analysis.
In fact, 60-odd swabs were taken at the house, which included the tiny and unusual shaped blood spots from the wall behind Jennifer's bed.
Police haven't ruled out robbery as a motive after discovering a video recorder missing from the home.
The appearance of possible robbery at the house was isolated just to a couple of rooms. There was no evidence of major ransacking of the premises at all. The types of items that were stolen were things like kids' calculators and Sony games, this type of item. We did locate a cabinet from which it appeared that there was likely a video recorder missing, whereas more valuable items were left untouched. The circumstance was as such that there may have been a bungled burglary which led to the victims being attacked, or one possible scenario is that there's been an attempt made to hide the crime.
Police suspected this was a staged break and enter, and the post-mortem examination pointed to it being done by one offender.
I felt that in this particular case of all three De Gruchy deaths that there was a distinct possibility that there was one weapon used, one assailant. It was a very rapid attack on all three people, that it was quite a sustained attack on each one, and also very, very violent. The pattern of injuries was very similar in all three cases. Sarah had injuries which were very similar to Adrian's head injuries, about her forehead and the top of her skull. But she also had some injuries on her arms, particularly her right arm, that looked to me as if she'd put up a bit of a struggle. I think it reasonable to think that she raised her arm in some way because there was a distinctive line of bruising on the inner aspect of her right forearm that had a very distinctive appearance. It had a squared off end and a linear strip of bruising that I think was caused by a shaft-like or a cylindrical object.
The injury which we noted on the arm of Sarah, we also noted similar linear type injuries on the body of Adrian.
There were a number of quite distinctive bruises on the front of the chest that were about 15 centimetres or so in length, but on top of that in the upper chest region, just below the collarbone, was a very distinctive circular shaped bruise. And I had to ask myself, and I asked the police, what might have caused not only the injuries which were quite linear on the front of the chest, but which also might have caused the circular shaped bruise on the upper part of the chest. So after a bit of discussion, we wondered whether it was something like a tyre lever or a car jack, a wheel brace, something like that, which, if used in various ways, could have produced these injuries.
The police were desperate to find that murder weapon, but it was what they didn't find that would lead the forensic team down an unexpected path.
The thought then goes to where would a wheel brace normally be? The next conclusion is it would be in a motor vehicle, and there was only one motor vehicle there. Jennifer De Gruchy's car, which was inside the crime scene area.
On opening the boot, it was noted that the hatch, which normally contains the vehicle jack and wheel brace, was slightly ajar, which indicated that in all likelihood at some stage or other someone had accessed this small compartment. On opening the hatch, the car jack was in position. However, the actual wheel brace and the car jack handle were missing. So it was unusual. We searched the rear of the vehicle for the wheel brace, but it wasn't located. On examining the spare wheel, it still had the flash. There was a small beading around the tyre surface, which was indicative that this particular wheel had never been on the road.
So there'd been never any need for those items to be used, and therefore there was never any need for them to be removed from where they'd been put in when the car had been manufactured.
The police confirmed that when Jennifer bought the car, the wheel brace was there.
Subsequently, we were able to be supplied with a similar type of wheel brace which would normally be with the vehicle. It was very similar indeed to the type of injuries that, which were inflicted on the deceased.
The injuries on the deceased bodies of Sarah and Adrian De Gruchy told a story of a brutal and vicious attack. It also gave clues to the murder weapon, a wheel brace that police were desperate to find.
Police have appealed for help in their hunt for the killer of a family of 3 battered to death in a frenzied attack. Detectives were back at the Albion Park home today with scanning equipment to search for clues and the murder weapon. A post-mortem has revealed 40-year-old Jennifer De Gruchy and her teenage children, Sarah and Adrian, were bludgeoned to death with a heavy metal object.
And what I'm now asking is for assistance from the public to report anything of a suspicious nature that they observed or saw or heard of.
The SES and Fire Brigade and police conduct a search of the backwater of Lake Warilla, which backed up to the house where the Gruchys lived, just to see if anything had been tossed. We didn't find anything.
Meanwhile, Jennifer's car that had its wheel brace missing had become an exhibit and was taken to the police compound to be forensically examined.
As a result of that examination, we were able to elicit another piece of evidence that assisted us with our inquiries.
A small, what appeared to be a carpet fibre, a little over a centimetre or so in length, was located on the floor of the vehicle behind the driver's seat. The significance of the carpet was that it appeared to be a very similar colour to the missing carpet from the main bedroom of the premises. It certainly didn't appear to be similar to any other carpet which was actually, for example, which was fitted to the car itself. A sample of carpet was taken from the main bedroom of the premises, and it was sent away for comparison examination with the carpet fibre recovered from the vehicle to see if they'd come from the same origin. The results of the examination or the comparison of the carpet indicated that it was highly probable that they had originated from the same source.
Detectives tonight are again interviewing Mrs De Gruchy's husband and 19-year-old son, hoping they can provide new clues to the killings.
At any inquiry, at the initial stages, everyone is a suspect. And as is the case in this inquiry, in the initial stages, Wayne De Gruchy was a suspect. He was interviewed about his movements the previous evening. To use the terminology that most people are aware of, he had alibis.
Wayne's alibi was that he was in Sydney, an hour and a half's drive from his home, playing golf that day and staying the night at his parents' place.
We were able to speak to those people and they confirmed his whereabouts.
However, other witnesses told another story.
There was information supplied to us that particular people had seen a Commodore which was consistent with the car that was normally used by Wayne De Gruchy, and further that they saw a person in that car that was not inconsistent with the description of Wayne in the early hours of the morning. The only problem with that was that the car that was normally used by Wayne had been involved in a motor vehicle collision some days prior and was actually in the smash repairs, which we were able to confirm. That showed that what they were telling us wasn't right. Further to that, the times of death decided by the pathologist weren't consistent with the possibility that Wayne could have travelled down after retiring in Sydney and committing the crimes and then returning.
I felt that the time of death was between approximately 8 p.m. on the 12th of March up to about 1 a.m. on the 13th of March 1996. And my reasons for those times are that based on the examination of the bodies at the scene, the temperature of the bodies, when comparing it with the ambient temperature in the garage and in the house, as well as the stiffening of the bodies and the gravitational settling of the blood, all three things in conjunction made me think that this was an approximate time for when these people might have met their deaths.
As police continued their search for the murder weapon, the missing piece of carpet, and the stolen items from the house, other important evidence was uncovered.
Not far from the body of Adrian was a red-coloured jerry can. The unusual thing was that the lid on the jerry can was actually in the open position, and examination revealed that there was a quantity of petrol within the jerry can. but it wasn't until we'd moved the body that it became evident that there was petrol on the deceased.
On Adrian's left side, there was some skin peeling, which I noticed, possibly suggestive that there might have been an attempt to partially douse Adrian in petrol and set him alight, and thereby setting the whole crime scene alight as well.
The fact that the deceased had petrol on his body and on his clothes, examination of the jerry can was very important, obviously.
The jerry can, along with other physical and biological evidence found at the scene, was now in laboratories being astutely examined. In one of those tubes, the DNA of the killer would be found. 3 members of the De Gruchy family had been murdered between 8 p.m. on the 12th of March 1996 and 1 a.m. on the following morning. Detectives believed the robbery was staged and the killings had been intentional. As yet, no murder weapon, the stolen items, nor the cut-out piece of carpet from Jennifer's bedroom had been found. But the jerry can that had been used to douse one of the victims was yielding results.
The usual procedure in any examination is to use just oblique lighting, a visual examination. We use a polylight to assist us with this. The fingerprints that appeared on the handle and the side of the handle of the petrol can were very good impressions. They didn't require further enhancement. They were photographed and used for comparison purposes.
To photograph the prints found on the underside of the handle, a mirror was placed underneath to capture the ridges that would be identical to one and one only person who had handled that can.
They then compared the fingerprints and identified the left, middle and ring fingers to be identical with the inked impressions of Matthew De Gruchy.
However, Matthew had used the jerry can often. The family cars were filled with petrol from this can, and Matthew was the one who did it. But what of the blood potentially recognised as being that of the killer? The diluted blood in the hallway and the small spots behind Jennifer's bed that were out of place with the other blood spatter evidence.
Detectives are waiting for the results of blood tests on a young man who said he found his family murdered in their home near Wollongong. Matthew De Gruchy and his father Wayne underwent the tests at a local hospital as they continue to help police investigate the triple murder.
The advantage of DNA is in the ability to discriminate quite easily between different individuals. Here we have a family, and I was able to easily distinguish through simple DNA testing the different people in the family, even though we were talking about a related group of individuals.
Dr. Gertz had received dozens of swabs from the house and needed to distinguish whose blood was whose, and whose was potentially the killer's.
Most of the blood matched that of the deceased, but the blood staining that was on the back of Jennifer's bed and the blood staining down the hallway had DNA that matched that of Matthew De Gruchy and not any other member of his family.
But how did Matthew's blood get there? His girlfriend Alyssa told police she had seen no injuries on him on the night of the murders.
Because Matthew had said he'd gone to his girlfriend's place, we then, as part of the investigation, obviously we spoke to his girlfriend. We were able to piece together a bit of a timeline.
Hey, Alyssa.
The police knew the couple had spoken with each other at 8 p.m.
He'd made an arrangement with her to attend there that evening, and he hadn't arrived, and so she made a phone call back to the De Gruchy household to speak to Matthew, and that was around 10 o'clock. That phone call went unanswered, so after that she went to bed. She wasn't aware if Matt was still coming up or not.
Although Matthew had said to his girlfriend that he would be there soon, he didn't arrive until 11 p.m. Some 3 hours after speaking with her.
He went into the house and he just told her that the reason he'd been delayed is because his mother had asked him to stay back because they'd received some crank phone calls. He'd said that one of the persons that had sent the crank call said to him, there'll be 3 members of your family dead.
Matthew had never told police at any time that his family had been threatened on the night they were murdered. So to confirm Alyssa's statement, investigators would need to check the telephone records of the De Gruchy household to uncover the truth.
We were able to establish telephone calls that had been made because we were able to go back and speak to people that made those calls. However, the telephone calls that Matthew mentioned to his girlfriend about people ringing and making the threats, we weren't able to establish if that had actually taken place. If that had happened, do you think it was one of the first things that would have been said to us?
Well, this is an electronic recorded interview between Detective Sergeant DJ Sharkey and Matthew Wayne De Gruchy. When the call's made, I'll just try and clarify myself. The phone rings, you pick the phone off out of the cradle. How long a time after picking the phone up does the line stay open?
When you just hear the beeps.
So, are you saying that they hang up as soon as you pick the phone up? Is that what happens?
Well, as soon as you pick the phone up to put it to your ear, you just hear the beeps.
We were trying to establish whether the calls had connected. We were asking him, had he taken the call? We were asking questions along the lines of, did you hear anything? Was there beeping to show that the call had connected?
So you're saying that they become aware as soon as it's a connection, and then they hang up, is that right?
Well, I guess so, yes.
If that story had been true, Matthew would have had to have heard someone say that to him, and there would have had to been a connection on the telephone line, and there wasn't.
Had Matthew killed his mother, brother and sister? And if so, what was the possible motive?
Has there ever been an occasion in the past where you've had an argument with your mother over the use of the car?
Matthew De Gruchy's fingerprints and blood had been found at the crime scene. He told police that he had stayed at his girlfriend's on the night of the murders, arriving there late because of crank calls that had come into the De Gruchy house. But when police checked, there was no record of them. Police were continuing to interview their prime suspect, this time about the discovery of the bodies.
Now, in the statement you made last Wednesday, the 13th, you spoke to the detective and he recorded in the statement about when you arrived home. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, can you just go over that again for me, please?
I arrived home at about 8:30, 8:35.
Hello?
Matthew told the police he returned home that morning to grab his wallet that he'd forgotten he'd left there, and then headed straight down to the local shops.
In the statement you say that you left the house and then went to get some cigarettes. Is that correct? Well, it doesn't record a nod. You're going to have to say yes or no.
Yes.
And then you returned to the house. Is that correct?
Yes, after the shop.
And that's what it says in your statement that you made that day, that you came back to the house from the shop after purchasing the cigarettes?
Yeah.
Well, what did you do then?
Opened the front door, walked inside, went to the kitchen, realised it was quiet. Went back down the hallway, sort of hit Sarah's door. Just didn't really worry about it, and then opened my mum's door.
What did you do then?
Realised about me mum.
Did you... What happened then?
Well, I didn't know what had happened, so it was, I don't know, breakdown and all that. Ran outside and then just to find help, and then I saw Steve across the road.
There's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
In the statement obtained from Steve Bailey, he says that Matthew came out and said there's something up with Mum and Sarah.
There's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
When interviewing Matthew, we spoke to him about what he did when he entered the house, and we specifically put it to him, did you go to your sister's bedroom?
Did you go to the lounge room at that time at all?
No.
Now, on that occasion, did you go to the dining room?
No.
Did you go to the kitchen?
No.
Did you go to your sister's bedroom?
When put to him, did he go into Sarah's bedroom? He said he didn't. If he hadn't have gone in there, how did he know that something happened to Sarah?
Now, you drove to Alyssa's place, that's correct?
Yeah.
And you arrived there sometime around 11, is that correct?
Yeah.
And that's what you said in your previous statement?
Yeah.
Whereabouts did you, and you drove your mother's car, is that correct?
Yeah.
Matthew had used the family car on occasions and put a lot of kilometres on it, so we've been told. And as such, the family had decided that he could use his father's car, his father's work vehicle. Normally, Matthew's father would have been home on that evening, but that day he'd been staying in Sydney, and as such, Matthew couldn't use his father's car. So he had to use his mother's vehicle to travel.
Matthew was therefore the last person who had access to the car on the night of the murders.
Has there ever been an occasion in the past where you've had an argument with your mother over the use of the car?
I wouldn't call it an argument.
I asked Matthew in an interview if there'd ever been any arguments over his use of his mother's vehicle, and he said, well, I wouldn't call them arguments, but we'd had received information that there had been some dispute between Matthew and his mother over the use of the car.
Has there ever been an occasion when your mother has declined your use of the car and you have threatened her with any physical force?
No.
Has there ever been an occasion where you've assaulted your mother?
No.
So Matthew was given the opportunity to confess to his involvement.
That concludes the interview.
He didn't take that opportunity. We allowed him to leave the police station. Then we went about our work to gather the evidence to show that he was the person that committed those crimes.
Without any witnesses, the detectives and forensic investigators would need to put together a whole jigsaw of circumstantial evidence. They already had Matthew's fingerprints on the jerry can, and they had found his blood in the house. And Matthew had been the last person to use his mother's car.
I received a carpet fibre that was found in the back of Jennifer De Gruchy's car. The fibre was about 3 centimetres long, and what was interesting about it was right at the end of it was a small red-brown stain. Because it was so small, there wasn't a lot of testing we could do with it, so what we did was we cut a small amount of that staining off and put it into a tube to pursue it with DNA testing. The tests on the carpet fibre found that the DNA could not have come from anybody in the family but Matthew De Gruchy.
That fibre had matched the carpet fibres in Jennifer's room, and police speculated how Matthew's blood came to be there.
He possibly could have bled as a result of a nosebleed through pressure. We've made inquiries, and that is a possibility that some people can bleed through the nose just as a result of the pressure that they're under. We really couldn't say how it got there. Suffice to say that it was Matthew's blood.
9 days after the murders, Matthew was attending the funeral of his mother, sister, and brother. It would take another 2 months before police would get the vital breakthrough and the last piece of the jigsaw they needed to complete their case. It had now been 2 months since Jennifer, Sarah and Adrian had been bludgeoned to death. Matthew De Gruchy, the prime suspect for their murders, was now spending time between the family home and that of his girlfriend. The police were still gathering their evidence, and lucky for them, a group of teenagers had an inquisitive nature.
I was about 16 at the time. A couple of mates lived right near this old quarry. It had a big dam in there, and this one particular day we were deciding to make a jump that went into the dam. We climbed up a bit higher onto this big ledge so we could actually see if we'd see how deep the water was, noticing something red in the water.
I'm not going in there. Neither am I. You can. Stinks.
That's only water.
My mate walked into the water to grab the bag. He then started walking back towards us as we all met him to grab the bag off him, as we all wanted to know what was in there. And as we opened it, there was a couple of bits of carpet, looked like what was squashed paper, and a hammer, which we actually decided to keep the hammer and threw the bag back in the water as we had no need for it.
The boys had found the bag only days after the murders. So when it came to the attention of the police 2 months later, they immediately drained the dam to find that evidence.
Detectives searched a dam at Woonona. It's alleged they found a number of items, many identified as having come from the De Gruchy household, including a video recorder, compact discs and a lady's purse with a photo licence of Jennifer De Gruchy.
The fact that we located the property was a big plus for us, because it certainly indicated to us that we were on the right path.
Earlier on, when Matthew had provided the list of items stolen from the house, it did appear a little bit odd to us that he was able to be so specific. Then when the items were found in the dam, it tended to confirm those suspicions, as the majority of items listed in fact turned up. There was a calculator which had the name A. De Gruchy, which is obviously Adrian's calculator, which was on the list as being stolen. There was also a lady's wallet with paperwork belonging to Jennifer De Gruchy. There's a video recorder and a number of other items, including a number of pieces of carpet which appeared as though they may well have been the carpet pieces that had been cut from the bedroom floor.
So did Matthew have time to kill 3 people, stage a robbery, cut the carpet, wipe the floor, drive to the dam to dispose of incriminating evidence, and then get to his girlfriend's by 11 p.m?
After discovery of the dam and the proximity of the dam to Alyssa's place, I then caused a couple of the members of my team to travel from the home of Matthew to the dam, then to Alyssa's. And what I got them to do was to travel at different speeds so I could see how long it would take just to satisfy ourselves that that was capable and possible to be done, which we did. It was certainly within the time frame.
Apart from the missing items from the house that were found in the dam and bag, another crucial piece of evidence existed.
There was a small plastic resealable bag located with the property, which appeared to contain a number of band-aids and what appeared to be small torn pieces of paper. It was visible on the paper that there was some sort of handwriting.
I think there were 13 pieces of paper in all that needed to be reconstructed. The document had been moist, it had been in water, and that some of the letters had actually bled into the fibres of the paper. When I was able to reconstruct the document, there were a number of words on that document, commencing with open gate, open blinds, Mum, Sarah, Adrian, hit self with pole, cut somewhere with knife.
It appeared to us, once the note was put together, it was a checklist of things that needed to be done to make it appear that someone else had committed the crimes in the De Gruchy household.
After the actual reconstruction of the documents, I was able to then compare the handwriting on that reconstructed document with known samples of Matthew De Gruchy's handwriting. There were about 12 points altogether that were fairly strong, similar features appearing between the two. I was of the opinion that it was probable that Matthew De Gruchy wrote the question writing, in that it was more likely than not that he did than he didn't.
We arrested him and charged him with the murder of his mother, brother and sister.
7 Nightly News with Ross Simons.
Good evening. An 18-year-old Wollongong man has been refused bail on charges of killing his mother, brother and sister. Matthew De Gruchy was arrested after a 3-month investigation into the triple murder.
Matthew claims he spent the night at his girlfriend's and only discovered the bodies when he returned home in the morning. Crown Prosecutor Paul Conlon claims DNA evidence links Matthew to the murder scene.
I think the finding of that carpet fibre with blood on it, which ultimately proved to be the blood or consistent with the blood of Matthew De Gruchy, was very significant in this case when we came to look at the fact that pieces of carpet had been cut out of the main bedroom. I commented to the jury that the person responsible for these killings had left his calling card on that carpet. All of the facts and circumstances in that case ultimately pointed in one direction and one direction alone, and that was to the guilt of Matthew De Gruchy.
A man is facing life in jail after being found guilty of murdering his mother, brother and sister. Matthew De Gruchy was just 18. The jury ruled he bashed them to death at the family home and then tried to make it look like a robbery.
I noticed that when the verdict was brought down, there was no reaction from him at all. He maintained a bit of a steely glare down towards his feet, and that was a pose which he'd maintained throughout the course of the trial.
Given that we had no murder weapon and no apparent motive for the crime, the forensic aspects of this case were so powerful that they were able to prove beyond reasonable doubt the involvement of Matthew De Gruchy in the commission of these 3 murders.
2.5 years after the murder of his mother, sister and brother, Matthew De Gruchy was sentenced to a minimum jail term of 21 years and a maximum of 28. His earliest release from prison would be in 2017, when he is 39 years old.
Whether it was because his mother wouldn't lend him the car or any other reason or disputes previously, I don't know. All I know is that all the evidence we had pointed towards Matthew and didn't point towards anyone else. So the only person that really knows why he did what he did is Matthew.
When blokes get together for a drink in a pub, they can often be fancy with the facts, like the hole-in-one they scored last Sunday, or the big one that got away that morning. It's brushed off as a bit of manly bravado. But what if the tale was one of multiple murder?
When firefighters first arrived, they found a large volume of smoke coming out of this building. They found that the front door was closed and locked, so they kicked it open. As they went in, they searched through different rooms to see if they could find any people that might be trapped. One of them went into a room which was like a lounge room, and he found a woman sitting on a lounge in that room. There was no fire in the room, but she appeared to him to be deceased. The other firefighter who went down towards the back of the building, when he got to the end of the hallway, he found a large room which was an office, which was totally involved in fire. And as he stepped into that room, he found the body of a woman laying on the floor. And he believed that there was a possibility that this woman may still be alive. So he dragged the body halfway up the hallway, and it was only at that stage that he saw that she had some horrific injuries and that she was dead. So they both went back down the hallway to make sure the fire didn't spread anywhere in the building.
After a O emergency call, fire crews arrived at Kerry's Relaxation Centre to find a blaze in a back room. As they put out the flames, a grim discovery.
Inside the building were 2 fatalities. The fire was quickly extinguished, and the cause of the fatalities and the cause of the fire is under investigation.
The premises were called Kerry's Oasis, and it was advertised as being a reflexology, health spa, which I think are probably fancy words for a massage parlour.
The two victims inside and the crime scene evidence surrounding them were giving police a strong indication of what had taken place.
Victim 1 in the front room appeared not to have struggled at all, and in fact I would go so far as to say that that particular victim didn't even see it coming.
She had a gunshot wound in the right cheek and a gunshot wound in the right neck, and there was a gunshot wound in the right temple that showed a muzzle abrasion, which indicates that the gun was held in contact with the skin when it was fired.
The fact that she was sitting in a natural sitting position on the couch and looking at the way the blood had run down the front of the body would strongly suggest that either she had been talking to the offender when she was shot and wasn't expecting anything to happen, or the offender walked straight into the room, shot her and then walked straight out again.
That person has then possibly gone out of that front room and had an altercation with victim number 2 and discharged a further 3 shots in the vicinity of the hallway towards the reception room. Inside the reception area, 2 walls had sustained bullet impact damage, and a humidifier had also been completely penetrated by what appeared to be a bullet.
We also found some groceries. We found a can of baked beans that had a dent in it. We found some newspaper that had blood on it. It was reasonably obvious that there'd been some sort of gun battle or event had taken place in that room. Down the hallway, there was an amount of blood smearing up on both sides of the hallway. There was a water cooler which had been knocked over, which once again suggests that a struggle occurred in that hallway.
While her body had been dragged by firefighters into the hallway, victim number 2 had made it to the far room. A pool of blood remained at the place she died.
There were some obvious cuts on the face and neck. There was quite a lot of damage to the face, which usually indicates somebody who's got a fair degree of dislike for the person. She also had a gunshot wound in the right eye, and I think it was probably the finishing shot. So both of the victims had been finished off with fairly close-range gunshot wounds. It looks like an execution.
One of the victims was discovered near the office. She'd been stabbed, her throat slashed. Police believe she's the 40-year-old manageress. Her 52-year-old de facto husband collapsed in shock after bebeing told she was dead.
Leave him! I don't believe him!
It was explained to him that he couldn't go in because it was a crime scene, and firefighters grabbed hold of him to stop him from going in there, and at that point he collapsed onto the street, and we immediately called for an ambulance to come and tend to him.
As he was taken to hospital, detectives looked at his car that had been abandoned on the street.
And when you opened the sliding door of the white Tarago, there was what appeared to be a lever-action rifle and a gun case immediately inside the door. The case was partially opened and blood was seen on the lining of the case and also the case itself. Obviously, a firearm so close to a double murder is highly suspicious, especially when there's blood on the gun case. Clearly, he knew the people that were in the house, and as a matter of course, we had to speak to him.
Post-mortems have confirmed that 2 murdered women were the victims of a frenzied attack in a Sydney massage parlour.
The killer set out to destroy as much evidence as he could, but the flames did not spread quickly enough to hide the secrets of his horrific crime. A post-mortem has still managed to reveal that 40-year-old Kerry Pang and Fatima Ozanal, 26, were brutally murdered.
Pang had been stabbed numerous times, her throat had been cut, and she had sustained a gunshot wound. Ozanal had been shot a number of times.
Kerry and her employee Fatima, also known as Nikki, had been shot by a .22 firearm. So when detectives discovered a gun matching the description in the boot of Kerry's de facto's car, they needed to speak with him. Mark Lewis had been released from hospital after being treated for shock.
You're aware now, aren't you, that Kerry and the other girl, Nikki, were murdered?
You told me they were shot, yes.
Do you have any knowledge about that at all?
No.
Would you care to tell me what your movements were this afternoon after 5 p.m?
As I mentioned to you before, I started watching news at 5 o'clock, and it's a 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock news, and probably 10 past, quarter past 5, the phone went, so I turned the TV down. I picked it up and just my normal mind, and I said, BOP, can I help you?
In the interview, Mr Lewis told us that he'd received a death threat for Kerry at his premises at West Ryde. He was also operating a massage parlour in West Ryde, which is a neighbouring suburb to Gladesville.
And the male voice said to the words to the effect, I'm going to kill your girlfriend. She doesn't deserve to live. Something to that effect. And then went the receiver. And I said, prickhead, you know, just a crank call, so I put it down. And I sat back and I went to put the TV back on. I felt funny in the stomach. It bothered me when normally crank calls don't bother me. And it was the voice. And it put it like a sort of a chill down my back. I just didn't feel right.
Mr Lewis, have you received any other similar phone calls to the one you received yesterday afternoon?
In the last 12 months, I've probably had 6 to 10 threats by phone. Some by male, some by females. Some people think I'm a bastard, some people think Kerry's a bitch, some people think, you know, we're you know, nasty people. He'd probably do too, but, you know, we're usually just normal people trying to make money to pay the bills and keep ahead, that's all.
After receiving this threat, he told us he called Kerry, and then she left the place at Gladesville, came to West Ryde and spoke to him about it.
And I said, mate, I threatened you, you know. I told her what was said, and she said, I haven't hurt anybody, I don't know anybody who, you know. Because over the years we have lots of problems with girls and husbands and all that, but nothing major. So she said, oh, well, I'll ring up Dick Gillespie. And she rang the Ryde detectives, because she had Dick's number with him. And they said, he's not here, he's a chat with. And she said, he's not there, but I've left a message on his answer phone.
And then Mark has accompanied her back to her premises at Gladesville.
I drove down the Gladesville, and just as you come down the Gladesville one, Pickwater Road, I think there's a little shop there. The place stopped and went in the shop, and she walked around and she got a loaf of bread, and she picked up a couple of tins of something. She got in her car, I got in my car, we drove around the corner, parked in the car park. We walked to the Gladesville door.
Kissed her goodnight, according to him, and he'd returned to the premises at West Ryde.
Do you recall what time that was that you knocked at the door and left?
A phone call came probably about 5:15. She was probably up there at 5:30, 5:45, something like that. So we'd have been down there at 6, 5:15.
And then returned to his parlour at West Ryde, arriving about 7 p.m. We also spoke to him about the rifle that had been found in his Tarago.
Would you explain to me or describe to me that firearm?
It's a Winchester 22.
Mr Lewis told us that when he was dropping Kerry off at the massage parlour, Kerry had wished to take the firearm that was in the back of the Tarago with her for self-defence.
I said, no, you don't really want to rock. And that was it, so I just left it in the car, threw it on the floor and back again.
Could you tell me how many .22 calibre rifles you owned?
I couldn't really have done it. Probably 3 or 4 or 5, I'm not 100% certain. Yeah.
Ballistics expert Ray Grimmer had looked at the 8 cartridges and 4 intact bullets collected from the crime scene. Under the microscope, he determined that they were all discharged from one firearm. Now he was testing all of Mark Lewis's guns, 8 in total, to see if one of them was the murder weapon.
Each weapon is test fired on 3 occasions.
Firing!
So that we could recover 3 fired bullets and 3 fired cartridge cases, and this is done in a water recovery tank within our section. Once the fired cartridge cases and the fired bullets are recovered, I then compare the surfaces of those bullets and fire cases to the surfaces of the exhibit fire cases and fired bullets from the crime scene. As a result of this, I was able to eliminate those 8 firearms as being responsible for the incident that occurred at Gladesville.
With the guns eliminated, police turned to the death threat. The crime scene and autopsy had suggested that Kerry was the likely target. And it appears she took the death threat mentioned by her de facto seriously enough to call the police.
Hi, could I have Dick Ledford call me urgently? 018 257 657. It's Kerry Pang. Thank you.
She got one bloke that has been coming backwards and forwards now for about, I suppose, 6 months. We call him Fred Flintstone because he's got a square head. He used to be one of our customers at Parramatta. He roughed up one of our girls at one stage. He is notorious. He rings Kerry and me 3 or 4 times a week. Who's on there and disguises his voice, you know, and all this sort of shit. Right. And we got a problem last week with a girl when she was leaving, and she threatened Kerry and myself.
When police tracked down and spoke with disgruntled clients and employees, all had alibis. But it was Mark Lewis's whereabouts they were now interested in. The phone call to the detective had brought up a discrepancy in Lewis's story, one that put him back in the spotlight.
Mr. Lewis's times were about an hour out from those that he'd been giving us, which put him in the vicinity of the murders.
8 guns belonging to Mark Lewis had been eliminated as the murder weapon involved in the death of his de facto Kerry and her employee. But 57-year-old Lewis was still firmly in the police sights.
Would you care to tell me firstly about your relationship with Kerry Pang?
Kerry and I lived together in a de facto relationship. We've had a de facto relationship now on and off for 4 years, 3 to 4 years. I broke up my marriage 3.5 years ago after 32 years, and during the last 3.5 years we spent 99% of that time together. I think a week here and a week there we might have been apart, and even when we were living apart we're still sleeping in the same bed, going to each other's house.
We spoke to a lot of friends and associates of both people. There were suggestions of infidelity on the part of Kerry. There were suggestions of a fairly insane jealousy on the part of Mark Lewis. There certainly were financial problems between them. There were professional problems between them. So the relationship wasn't as smooth and as loving as Mr. Lewis described in his interview.
With that knowledge, police began to scrutinise his version of events.
Do you recall what time that was that you got her at the door and left?
The phone call came probably about 5:15. She was probably up there at 5:30, 5:45, something like that. So we'd have been down there at 6, 5:15.
It was true Kerry had gone to her de facto's massage parlour at West Ryde, and she had made a call to the police.
Hi, could I have Dick Ledford call me urgently? It's Kerry Pang. Thank you.
But telephone records and one of Mark Lewis's employees put her there at 6:45 p.m, not 5:45 p.m, as Lewis had claimed.
I had not butterflies in my stomach, but I felt funny in the stomach. She said, well, how about we take Chris back to Gladesville and we'll close West Ryde? I said, yeah, that's a good idea.
Chris, who was Mark Lewis's worker, decided to stay. She told the police that the two left at 7 p.m. in separate cars, and that Kerry had called her just before she reached the massage parlour. Phone records confirming it was 7:18 p.m.
Do you recall what time that was that you got her at the door and left?
So we'd have been down there at 6, 5:15.
Only 12 minutes later, the firefighters were called. Kerry and her employee were already dead. Now, in Lewis's account, by 7:30 p.m, he had already been back at his business for half an hour.
After you left Gladesville, where did you go?
Back to the front.
And what time approximately do you think that you arrived back there?
As I said, would have been from the news. Would have been about, I suppose,
about 7.
Could have been 10 minutes either way.
The woman working at the West Ryde massage parlour with Lewis on the night told us that he'd returned about 8 p.m. from Kerry's place. It indicated that Mr Lewis's times were about an hour out from those that he'd been giving us, which put him in the vicinity of the murders, pretty close to the time that they may have occurred.
Then there was the rifle bag and Mark Lewis's clothes that were removed for evidence on the night of the murder.
On the shirt and the shorts and the shoes, I found very small areas of staining, which a preliminary test then tested positive for blood. I also tested the rifle bag, and on a number of areas on the outside of the rifle bag, there were very small stains, and inside there were also small stains which could have been blood. So the samples were sent for DNA testing, and the DNA profile from Mark Lewis's shorts matched Kerry, and the profile recovered from the outside of the rifle bag also matched Kerry. But on his shirt there was a mixture of DNA, which indicated to us that there was DNA from more than one individual, most likely 2 people.
One was Kerry's, the other was unknown. It could have been Mark Lewis's. It may have belonged to someone else.
We had to remember, of course, that Kerry was Mr Lewis's partner. She travelled regularly in the vehicle and obviously regularly had close contact with him. So evidence of her blood on his clothing, in the amounts that it was there, were not suggestive by themselves that he was involved directly in the murder. Certainly something didn't smell right about him, but there wasn't enough to go around accusing him of a murder at that stage.
Can you tell me what your association, both past and present, with Lindsay Rose has been?
Then, 2 years later, a breakthrough.
Well, I've known Lindsay for about 10 years now. I just met him initially just as a drinking companion.
Here you go, mate.
We had an informant that we trusted, that we were confident was giving us reliable information. And he told us that he was speaking to Lindsay Rose, and Lindsay Rose had told him that he had committed a number of murders.
When police put Lindsay Rose's name through their computer, they discovered the 41-year-old had only some minor criminal charges. Yet here he was in a pub, bragging about having committed a double murder on Valentine's Day.
Lindsay Rose was saying that the husband of the woman that actually owned the parlour had paid him $20,000 to do a professional hit on her and made sure she was killed.
But as police were to find out, Lindsay Rose had only just begun to tell his story. Task Force Yandy had been set up to re-examine a number of unsolved murders in New South Wales. As a result of their investigations, they were given a lead for one cold case. An informant told detectives that the Valentine's Day murders were the result of a professional hit. Mark Lewis had apparently hired Lindsay Rose to kill his de facto wife.
Now, it turns out that Lindsay Rose and Mark Lewis were quite good friends. They had had a working relationship and a friendship over many years. Mark Lewis had a number of companies, and Lindsay Rose worked for Mark Lewis on repossessions and security.
With that link established, police approached Mark Lewis.
He refused to be interviewed, would not answer any questions.
So if police wanted to prove Mark Lewis had ordered the hit, then they needed to put Lindsay Rose at the crime scene. The physical evidence that had been preserved was re-examined, starting with Mark Lewis's shirt that had the DNA mixture upon it.
We could not discount that the blood on the shirt may have been Lindsay Rose's. The struggle with the victim, Kerry, was very violent, so we needed to know his blood type. We were able to make some investigations, and the blood group that Lindsay had was AB-RH negative, which is a very, very rare blood grouping.
That blood grouping was not found in the mix, but there was slightly better luck on the ballistics front.
The informant had told us that Lindsay gave him the gun, and the informant said that he sold the gun to a mate that wanted a gun for protection. He was able to tell us who that person was, and we executed a search warrant on his premises, and we found a .22 calibre target pistol, with a homemade silencer.
Firing.
We had it ballistically tested, but it was inconclusive. The ballistics expert could only say that it was similar, and we couldn't prove beyond doubt that that was the murder weapon. We then come to the nose piece from the eyeglasses that was found at the scene.
This small yet significant item was found in the hallway outside the reception area where the gun battle had taken place. While Mark Lewis's eyewear was intact on the night, police now had another suspect.
We knew Lindsay Rose wore glasses, and because we found the nose piece, we were pretty sure that the glasses would have been damaged. We then interviewed every optometrist in the area where Lindsay lived. And lo and behold, 3 days after the murders, an optometrist gives us a card where a person named Lindsay Rose had put his glasses in to be repaired. Lindsay's actually signed the card and it was his signature. It's a tiny piece, but when you get all the tiny pieces of evidence coming together, it becomes crucial. So he was brought into the police centre and he was interviewed. He denied any implication in the murders. He said he knew about them, but told us that the informant that we were using was the person who had committed the murders and that another person called Donnie had done the murders with him.
Detectives believed their informant wasn't involved. But could this Donnie be more than just a name? Had Lindsay Rose slipped up and given police a key witness?
Lindsay quite often called himself the mechanic, which was a Charles Bronson term as a hitman.
You ever hear the term mechanic used outside of its normal meaning?
Yeah, it's a shooter. A hitman.
And he had an apprentice, which again came out of that movie. And we found out that Lindsay was bragging that he had an apprentice with him during this murder.
I'm telling you this because there are times when I could use a backup.
It was possible that the apprentice was the mystery man, Donnie. But as investigators delved into Rose's associates in order to get his identity, they heard some disturbing news.
The informant had told us that Lindsay had confessed to him that he'd committed a number of other murders. There was a couple in Western Sydney and the surname started with K. And he just mentioned to the informant, laughingly, I hope they enjoyed the oysters.
Being given such specific information that unfortunately was so broad made it difficult for us. So we did a lot of research at the New South Wales State Library, going through all the records of the newspapers, while at the same time my partner was off having a look at the old case files of unsolved murders. And sure, there'd been some double murders and people had been shot, but it was this information about the oysters that we were sort of looking for, this holy grail. We finally found a news clipping of unsolved murders and it showed pictures of Edward Kavanagh and Carmelita Lee. We then went back across to the old files and started to pull apart that investigation. But there was a set of photographs taken at the crime scene by the forensic investigator, and sure enough, about the third photo I found was the hallway with a bottle of oysters that were smashed. And I remember looking at my mate and he looked at me and we thought, well, we're on to a good thing here.
The 1984 double murder of Bill Kavanagh and his de facto Carmelita Lee had remained unsolved for 12 years.
When I first walked into the premises, you walk up the stairs onto a balcony that leads to the front door, and just inside the front door there was 2 bottles of oysters. One was completely smashed and the other one was intact.
That was never at any stage released to the media at the time of the murders or subsequently to that.
The details of the deaths had also remained a secret.
Mr. Kavanagh had been shot 4 times, once in the forehead, between the eyes.
Lindsay Rose had remarked to the informant that his first shot was a really good shot and it hit him between the eyes, and he was proud of that fact, which is something, again, that only perhaps the murderer would know.
His wife, Carmelita Lee, she also had been shot 4 times at close range. Looked like it was some sort of execution, professional hit, you could call it.
When you look at that in comparison to the other double murder, clearly that was very, very similar to what had occurred some 10 years later.
And there was one more piece of evidence from the crime scene that left investigators in little doubt that Lindsay Rose had not been bragging.
We also found some blood under Bill Kavanagh's fingernails, which was later forensically examined. We didn't have DNA in 1984, but it was grouped to find that it was common to less than 1.5% of the population of Australia.
It was ABRH negative, and Lindsay Rose was a member.
From my point of view as an investigator, this was something pretty important. Lindsay Rose has a rare blood group and Edward Kavanagh has his rare blood group under his fingernail. We're thinking, you know, here's something that we've got to jump on as quickly as we can.
Lindsay Rose had formed for motor vehicle offences and false pretences. Now it seemed he'd entered the big league without detection. And his ability to fly under the police radar had just continued.
We were in the Strike Force office with the boss and he received a call from the surveillance people to say that it looked like Lindsay Rose had in some way got away from them. It caused us great concern straight away because not only was one of the other teams looking at him for a double murder, I'd now started to kick off things and look at him for something very similar.
We were just flabbergasted. We really did not believe that they would lose him. But again, nobody's perfect. And we found out that he went into the arcade, went into a hairdresser, had his hair cut and coloured. He's a redhead and he had it coloured dark. He took his glasses off and put contact lenses on and changed his clothing. So he's actually walked out past the surveillance teams and they've just missed him.
So we had to do everything we could to try and track him down.
With Rose on the run, the hunt for the mechanic's apprentice was stepped up.
Exhaustive investigations finally came up with a name.
This is Ronald Lewis Waters.
The apprentice was Ronald Waters, but he went by the nickname Donny. Everyone knew him as Donny. We actually interviewed him and he confessed to his part in the murder.
Would you like to show and tell us what happened here on the 14th of February 1994?
Okay, we walked from the car across to here. I walked up to the door.
When you say we, who do you mean by?
Me and Lindsay Rose. I walked up to the door and I knocked on the door and Lindsay was standing about there.
Donny told us during the interviews that he certainly wasn't aware that Rose was going to murder anybody. He just said that he had to get into this massage parlour and his face was well known and he would give Donny $500 if he would just go to the door and let them see him, and when they opened the door, Lindsay would come in.
What happened then?
Then I walked inside because she let me inside and she was talking about the massage and whatnot.
What was Lindsay doing?
He was still standing there.
Yes.
And then Lindsay pushed past me with the gun.
They were expecting Kerry to be there and she wasn't. There was an 18-year-old girl there.
He forced her up here and into this room here, and there was a lounge, and he sat her just there. And then I walked over to the window and looked out the window, and there was two people, a man and a woman, walking across the road to the direction of the house. And then I heard a sort of noise, and I turned around and he'd shot the girl on the chair. And then he told me to hide.
Donny Waters was shocked at what had gone on. He couldn't believe that he would just cold-bloodedly murder this young girl. And that's when Kerry came to the door.
And the man that was with her walked out with a rifle, aimed at me, and I didn't know if he was going to shoot me or not, so I punched him. And then I tackled him and sat on him as he was laying on the ground here. Lindsay got up me for hitting the bloke and for sitting on him because he was saying that the bloke that was on the ground was paying Lindsay to do the job. And from what I heard, he was either the boyfriend or the husband of the second girl.
That was the evidence that was missing in the original 1994 investigation. We now had an eyewitness who was willing to give evidence, implicating Mark Lewis and implicating Lindsay Rose.
The detectives decided not to arrest Mark Lewis. While the circumstantial evidence of Kerry's blood on his rifle bag and shirt were now more compelling, police had a stronger case if Rose was to admit to being hired by Lewis. But they needed to find him first.
Police fear this ramshackle property at South Wentworthville could turn into a graveyard.
So in their quest to track down the contract killer, the police went public.
The informant had told us that at some stage Rose had lived at a premises and he'd secured things or hidden them in this subfloor area.
And Lindsay had told this informant that that would be a good place to hide a body.
Once home to Lindsay Rose, detectives are now digging it up to find if any murder victims are buried there.
That was something that attracted a lot of media attention, so we talked about why we were at that location.
The dig was ordered by a special police task force, Yandy, which is investigating up to 8 unsolved murders in Sydney and on the North Coast. Police want to question 42-year-old Rose over the killing of 2 women inside a massage parlour at West Ryde 3 years ago.
At this stage, I don't really want to speculate on what we expect to find inside the subfloor area.
We'd hoped that we might well have found a body or some weapons, firearms, or anything that might well have linked Lindsay Rose to one of these double murders.
While nothing of significance was found at the site, it looked like the news report had done its job. Only minutes after the story went to air, a man called with information. He told police Lindsay Rose was in Adelaide. But what if Rose had also been watching the same report?
That's probably the biggest fear of, if you know where Rose is, that he's eluded us once. I don't want to see it happen again.
Lindsay Rose had been on the run for over 10 months. That was until an observant member of the public recognised his photo and contacted the Adelaide police.
In a very short space of time, their surveillance police were able to pick up Rose and they were able to positively identify him. And the call came back to us, we've got him here, what are your instructions? The boss and Rod Baker and myself saying, well, our instructions are get hold of him right now.
Do you agree that you were arrested by South Australia Police at approximately 6:40 a.m. yesterday morning, being the 10th of April 1997?
It was 5:40, but yes, I was.
Oh, beg your pardon, 5:40 a.m.
To say we were ecstatic that we finally got him was an understatement. We were just overjoyed.
Detectives Baker and Appleton had jumped on the first plane to Adelaide.
On one hand, I'm thinking, we're going to get there and we're going to get a stone-faced person who won't give us the time of day, or we're going to get someone who wants to talk about what's occurred over the last 10 years. And I can tell you that it's a strange feeling to be on your way, and I have to prepare for the matter, so I have to go along thinking, well, he's going to talk to me and tell me everything, so if I get that one opportunity, I'm going to have to make sure I hit the mark on everything.
Inspector Baker and I are making inquiries into the murders of an Edward Kavanagh and Carmelita Lee at Hoxton Park on or about the 20th of January 1984. Is there anything you can tell me about that?
Yes, I did it.
Okay, yeah.
And I thought to myself, wow, there you go. Lindsay Rose has just confessed to murdering Kavanagh and Lee. He was so direct and so matter of fact, yes, I'm the killer. I did it.
Your answer to me before was, I did it. What do you mean? Can you tell me what you mean by that?
I went to the house there and shot him.
All right.
The Asian girl was there, and I tied her up and gagged her so she wouldn't make any noise and waited for Bill to come home.
What happened when Bill Kavanagh came home?
He walked up to the front door and saw me standing in the hallway and stopped.
And what happened then?
I shot him.
Where did you shoot him?
If I remember correctly, I hit him there.
And just describe that for me, where you mean there.
Oh, in the middle of the forehead.
Okay, and what happened when you shot him?
He hit the deck. When he fell, he dropped 2 bottles of oysters and they smashed on the floor.
The information Lindsay was giving us was just corroborating evidence that we had gathered and that the original investigators had gathered. and there was no doubt that Lindsay was the murderer. The following day, we interviewed Lindsay in relation to the Valentine's Day murders. He just readily admitted, this time, the truth about what had gone on.
I was the person involved, in company with a fellow by the name of Donny, and I committed the murders.
Why did you shoot Fatima Rosnell?
So she wouldn't cause any trouble.
Did you realise when you shot her you could kill her?
Yes.
Did that cause you any problems?
Yes.
Why?
Because she shouldn't have been there.
What happened then?
Kerry walked in the door, Mark was right behind her and he had a gun.
Were you surprised to see Mark Lewis?
Yeah, he's not supposed to be there.
What happened then?
A big melee broke out. She was screaming, Mark was screaming, Kerry was struggling with me, Mark was struggling with me, and Donny was struggling with everybody.
I jumped on that bloke again and stayed on him, and then she ran up this hallway into that room there.
This struggle happened all the way down the hallway, and we ended up in the back room.
She was still saying, no, Lindsay, you've got me already, and don't kill me. And then I heard like a gargling noise.
Did you do anything else to her?
Yeah, I stabbed her.
Why did you stab her?
Because Mark was yelling and screaming that she's not dead, or something like that.
What happened then?
I shot Kerry.
Where did you shoot her?
In the eye, I think.
He showed no remorse. He showed no sense of mercy. He just related a story as it unfolded. It was quite chilling, actually.
When during the melee did your glasses get broken, do you remember?
No, it was just a blur. I think they fell off and someone stepped on them, or I stepped on them, or something, I can't recall.
Do you remember what part was broken?
Yeah, later on, I had to buy a nose piece, and I actually got new lenses made up.
Lindsay said the main reason he did the killing was that Mark Lewis had just harassed him for months and months about getting rid of his wife. They were having domestic problems and he just wanted to get rid of her.
It was just the pressure from Mark. He said, you're going to do it, and he upped the ante to 20,000. That's when I decided to do it, and I just remembered something. I got the gun off Mark Lewis. There you go. Mark Lewis supplied me with the weapon.
Lindsay Rose was then extradited to New South Wales and charged with all 4 murders. Now the detectives could do what their counterparts couldn't 3 years before. Arrest and charge the Hollywood performing Mark Lewis with the murder of his de facto wife and her workmate.
The evidence of Donny Waters combined with DNA and scientific evidence led the jury to convict Mark Lewis of both counts of murder. He received life imprisonment for the murder of Kerry and 18 years imprisonment for the murder of Fatima. Mark Lewis is calculated as cold-blooded as Lindsay, but more of the coward type of person, not willing to do it himself, but quite willing for someone else to do his dirty work.
Donny was given and has served an 18-month sentence for his part in the murders. As for Lindsay Rose, he will never be released. He pleaded guilty to the 2 double murders and confessed to a 5th.
This man killed 5 people and almost got away with it. Lindsay Robert Rose killed his victims in cold blood. Among his victims, Gladesville massage parlour workers Kerry Pang and Fatma Rosnell. Both were shot. Edward Kavanagh and Carmelita Lee were executed in the bedroom of their Hoxton Park home. Rose's most brutal attack, though, was on Renette Holford. During a bungled robbery, she was stabbed 32 times.
5 people died over a period of 10 years at the hands of Lindsay Rose. Ironically, a man the court had heard had used those same hands to save lives as an ambulance officer at the Granville train disaster.
He He was there for most of the time. He was one of the first ambulance officers there. He actually crawled into carriages, assisted people, helped the dead and the dying, and was just an absolute hero on the day. And then to reconcile that to a serial killer and the brutality of the murders just beggars belief.